Hey, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Teddy Chestnut. I'm the co-founder of Bright Hire. I'm your MC and host for this session. Quick housekeeping as we jump in. If you've got a question along the way here, ask it either in the chat or in the ask a question field at the bottom, wherever you want. Manisha, Rachel, or I will try to jump on them along the way. And we've gathered some questions from the folks at home already. Thank you for submitting them, and we're going to try to get to those as well. As I jump in, one quick obligatory plug on Bright Hire, who we are. We are the leading interview intelligence platform. What we do is record and transcribe interviews and make the highlights searchable and shareable across teams. So teams like MURAL and Salesloft can streamline the interview process, have the right information at their fingertips to make better and less biased hiring decisions. And ensure that they're giving every candidate the hiring experience that they truly deserve. But I'm going to close my screen because this is not a conversation ultimately about us. This is a conversation about Manisha and Rachel. And so, peace out. There we go. Two of the most accomplished recruiters that we have the pleasure to work with over at Bright Hire. They're going to drop some knowledge today on what recruiters can do to hire faster without compromising the candidate experience. In the next hour, Rachel, Manisha, are you ready to walk us through why it's important to streamline your hiring process?
Let's do it.
All right. How you can effectively encourage hiring managers to move fast and or get off the pot. And what time-saving tools and platforms you're using to move faster. All good? Ready?
Ready to go.
Cool.
Let's
All right.
do it.
Before we jump in, let's do some quick intros so folks at home can get to know you both. So I'm going to ask each of you to answer 3 questions. How did you get into recruiting? Because that's always an interesting question. What roles do you recruit for? And fill in the blank. If you weren't a recruiter and if money was no object, you would be a... So Manisha, let's start with you.
Sure. So how did I get into recruiting? I don't think most folks in general dream about getting into staffing, right? So I graduated with a finance degree and realized that I had no interest in pursuing a career in that space. So I was introduced to a friend of a friend who was in staffing, and based on how he described recruiting, I thought I'd be a good fit. And here I am still in recruiting 10 years later.
Classic referral story. Nice. And what roles do you recruit for?
Yeah, so I've mainly focused on recruiting roles in the tech space. So software engineers, DevOps, engineering leadership, anything on the technical side.
Awesome. And if you weren't a recruiter and money were no object, you would be a...
That's a tough question. I think it would have to be a baker. So I never really had an urge to bake, but after going to Spain a few years ago and just tasting all the delicious pastries, I kind of came back with a sweet tooth and bigger appreciation for baking. So I'd kind of say I'm a novice when it comes to baking, but I think that's probably what I would pick.
Nice. And you are with MURAL. Do you want to introduce the folks to MURAL really quick? Just overview the company.
Sure. So I started in January at MURAL. I'm in a technical talent lead position, and we basically provide a visual collaboration software, which allows folks to collaborate more cohesively as a team.
Nice. Rachel, over to you. How did you get into recruiting?
Yeah, so my background was actually in higher education. In my last semester of grad school, I hired 170 students and decided I did not want to be a dean of students, which was kind of my lifelong goal at that point, and landed in the SaaS world as a recruiting coordinator and have been in recruiting ever since.
A lifer. And what roles do you recruit for?
Yeah, so I recruit pretty much everything in the revenue organization. Currently in account executives, SDRs, customer success managers, but have pretty much hired every revenue position here at Salesloft, which has been a lot of fun over the last almost 2 years.
Amazing. And if you weren't a recruiter and not a dean of admission, and money were no object, you would be a...
I would be a nomadic traveler in a camper van. I would camper van across the US and just explore national parks and just get to meet a lot of really cool people on the road.
That's awesome. Have you like done that before, or this is just an idea? Like, I think it would be cool to like jump in a camper van, but actually I haven't thought about not showering for like, 6 months at a time.
No, my partner and I did a week-long road trip in October to test out our life in a camper van. And he and I survived together in a very small Euro van. Yes, van life, Linda. And we have a pipe dream to buy one. And luckily Salesloft loves remote work. And so hopefully eventually I will be able to do both recruiting and van life.
Amber supports it. I think you're on board. And tell us a little bit about Salesloft.
Yeah. So Salesloft is a sales engagement tool that helps sellers be more efficient. We remove about 70% of the admin work out of a seller's day-to-day.
Amazing. I love that I asked you both without prep to like give a short background on like MURAL and Salesloft, and it's just like nailed it. Just like got the talk track so tight. Cool. So we have technical, we have go-to-market. We're covering like basically every important role in tech companies. And to kick things off on both sides of the house, both on the go-to-market and on the technical side, it's a crazy market right now, maybe the craziest that anybody has ever seen. I'd love to hear maybe each of you share an anecdote about like just how hectic things have been over the last several months. Like, are you getting ghosted by candidates, or is it hard to follow up with folks? Like, what's an exemplary anecdote of how crazy the market is right now? Rachel, we can start with you.
Yeah. So I think for me, just the number of counter offers and candidates in multiple processes has been just by far, that's been the most competitive piece for us. And I think just the scale at which we've hired, we are in hyper growth mode. And so, scaling our team while also trying to hire for the business has been a challenge for us, but we have a full team now, which is awesome. But ultimately, I would say just the number of candidates who are, in 4 or 5 processes, and you're trying to move very quickly to win them over, knowing that, you don't want to be the highest in the market from a comp perspective, but want to be fair and equitable to your current teams too.
Manisha, what about you?
Yeah, I would say it's definitely sort of a similar situation. I think that the ball is definitely in the candidate's court more now than ever I've ever experienced, especially just looking at the last few months. I'm sure many of us, including myself, have experienced like an increase of candidates ghosting before even the first screen, having multiple offers, like Rachel mentioned, and then basically getting to offer stage and the candidates telling you, hey, I got a counter offer or I was promoted. And then even referrals, they're not locked down even if they've worked with the hiring manager in their previous company. So it's been a whirlwind of challenges, but we've also been able to maneuver through that and hire quite a bit.
Yeah, I'd love to actually stay on this a little bit. So both of you mentioned tons of candidates with competing offers, sometimes coming into the process, they already have offers in hand, or this comes up later in the cycle. Manisha, are there 1 or 2 tactics that you've found you've had to adopt, or the team has had to adopt in order to adjust to that reality?
Yeah, so to kind of pick out one of the things that we mentioned, I think that many companies have realized that they need to invest in the employees that they have, right, working for them, and have had several candidates receive a promotion in the midst of being in an interview process. We're not only having to think about the risk of a candidate receiving a potential counter offer when you're extending an offer from your company, but also just getting that promotion. So recently I was recruiting for a senior engineering manager, and I came across like a semi-passive candidate who was possibly open to leaving because they wanted to join a company where they could not only get like career growth, but be at a high growth company. And we're at like the final stage, and in the process, I think everything is going great. And then I received an email from the candidate, and she's like, hey, I wanted to let you know I got promoted in the last day or so, but I'm still interested, which is a little different than what I would expect. So of course I was happy and excited for the candidate, but at the same time, I'm like, so you're telling me that there's a chance. So my immediate reaction is, let me reach out and see if we can get a call so I can understand why is she still interested in this role. Mm-hmm. So we did end up extending an offer, and basically it was, the current company wasn't really, they're allowing individual growth, but not necessarily high company growth. Mm-hmm. And so looking back at why she ended up accepting, I think it was helpful to go ahead and address the situation versus waiting till she actually got the offer. I find just waiting till the end, it sort of delays the candidate from taking action, because now they're sort of in doubt, hey, should I make the change or not?
I love that you actually won this candidate back, even though she got a promotion. That's amazing. Never say die.
It's never easy, is what I say.
It's never easy. Rachel, what about you? Is there anything specifically that you've found yourself doing or doing differently because of the competitive nature of the market?
So during the first call, I'm asking candidates where they're at in their hiring process, right? Are they in early stages, mid stages? Are they expecting offers, so that we already have a clue of how fast we need to be moving, and are clued into that. And a lot of times candidates will be very open and transparent. I also try to be super transparent on our side of hey, I want to move quickly. We have candidates in later stage, right? So just trying to keep everybody aligned there. But I have found just asking that question is super helpful. And then to Misha's point, asking what their motivators are, why are they looking for a role in the beginning, right? On that first call, what are you looking for in the next role? Why are you looking to leave? And just asking those 3 questions during my initial screens so that we have those motivators up front. So as we're continuing to close candidates at each stage, we're continuing going back to those motivators and making sure that we're aligning Salesloft has this or Salesloft doesn't have this, right? And where does that fall in the order of what's most important for you?
So for the folks at home, the checklist was, where are you in your process?
Yep.
What is motivating you, and why this role specifically, or why Salesloft specifically?
Yeah. So why are you looking to leave, right? What is missing at your current company, role, team? And then what are you looking for in your next role? And then where are you at in your process? Those 3 questions I find to be super helpful.
So here's another question. You both obviously way on top of this. You're covering this in your first screen. You're having check-on calls with your candidates as they're moving through the process. But a lot of other people touch those candidates along the way. How are you coordinating with your hiring managers or other interviewers on the panel to share that information about what their motivators are, why they're looking, and continuing to sell and kind of exert candidate control through every stage of the process? Rachel, we can stay with you on that. How are you actually facilitating that across all the people that you're working with?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, keeping my hiring manager super close. So I do a weekly check-in with each of my hiring managers. It's a 30-minute sync on the calendar, week over week, repeatable meeting. And that's one of where we know we're coming together. I know I have their full attention for 30 minutes to chat about where candidates are, where are the gaps we're seeing in process, what are we missing, where do we need to dig, what are those motivators, all of those pieces, covering, the full funnel with each candidate. And I find that to be super helpful. And that's one of the pieces where I use BrightHire a lot, actually, Teddy, is pulling in some of those little nuggets, right, of candidates talking about their motivators. Or, if I know a hiring manager is going to have an objection to something, right? I'm anticipating that objection and I'm pulling in a little nugget going, hey, listen to this clip. This is where they talk about that, right? And so that's been super helpful in continuing to sell our hiring managers while we're selling our candidates as well.
That makes sense. The hiring manager relationship is super important. Manisha, I'm curious what you've done or what have you seen work to get hiring managers to really take a partnership orientation, to invest. Rachel mentioned, I've got this half hour, I'm locked in, right? We're working together. What have you seen work to convert hiring managers who maybe weren't fully on board to really become part of the process?
I think it does start with just setting expectations on your first meeting with the hiring manager, right? And just sharing why the process will benefit them. Being urgent and just proactive in your communication so they feel like you have their back. For example, if you have a candidate that has a final interview on Wednesday, but your weekly sync is not until Friday, just go ahead and schedule time right after the interview so you can get that feedback. The worst that will happen, right, is that the hiring manager spends this time interviewing the candidate and finds out that they accepted another offer before they even had a chance to make a decision. And I think the other piece that I found helpful is like actually creating a Slack channel with all the interviewers, including the hiring manager. It makes it a lot easier from a communication standpoint, especially for the folks who are working with coordinators. It's hard for them to, sift through who's the right person to contact when they're scheduling and coordinating for multiple positions and multiple teams. So I found that helpful to say for them just to reach out and say, hey, just wanted to make sure you're good to go. I know you're speaking to this candidate, and just making sure everybody's on the same page.
Nice. And super tactically, that's a Slack channel for like every specific role that a team is working on.
So for the way that we do it, we have like multiple pillars. So typically for product engineering, we'll have all the interviewers for each pillar just for everybody's sanity, right? That would probably be too many if we split it up. But for example, I've been recruiting a lot for engineering managers and directors. So for those, I do have specific individual Slack channels for those interviewers.
Got it. What we were just talking about relates to one of the questions we got from one of the folks at home, Kevin Anderson from Qualia. He said, recently I've been seeing candidates get interview fatigue at the finish line. Any thoughts on how to keep candidates energized about the opportunity, even when kind of the rigors of intense panel interviews kind of like may wear on them? Thinking about a candidate going through 3 or 4 processes at the same time. Rachel, like, how do you think about keeping candidates super engaged all the way through up to the finish, even when it can be an intense process?
Yeah, we have long processes here at Salesloft. I'll be the first to admit it.
Come on.
I'm also one to push back on my hiring manager when they want to add process steps through the process. That's a big no-no in my world. But I would say for me, I like to set expectations on the first call with candidates about what our process looks like, right? So, I'm talking about each step to make sure that they understand this is a 4-step process or this is a 3-step process and what to expect at each step. And then we do quick call check-ins, right? So, I'll do a wrap up after the call to say, after their first meeting to say, how did it go? How are you feeling? What's your thoughts? So that I have the candidate's feedback initially. And then that way I can go back to the hiring manager and say, hey, how did it go on your side? So-and-so said it went really well. And so that's where, finding that balance there. But I think just staying really engaged and close with the candidate and making it personal, I think is the most important piece, right? Making it feel like a personalized process, and that those personal touches go a long way.
Yeah, let's get really tactical about this actually, because I love this. What are the very specific touch points that you will have with a candidate from between first screen when you first speak with them and offer extended? Like, how are you actually keeping them warm? What do those personal touches look like and feel like? Is there one that like you feel like is your secret weapon that like really like makes a massive difference for candidates to keep you engaged?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think for me, I'm typically scheduling the hiring manager call on my first call. If I'm excited about the candidate, before I get off that first call, we've scheduled the hiring manager screen and I've prepped them on what to expect during that call. So I'd say that's number one. Post that call, I'm typically reaching out if there's an assessment that's in our process at that point, or a presentation, which is typically our next step, and making sure that it's scheduled and that they have everything they need for that. That's typically what we would call like a weed out stage, right? Like presentations they're hard. Role plays are not fun for most candidates. So making sure they're feeling confident going into those presentations. And then post that, following up during that what we consider on-site or our final stage interview, which is the longest. So that's going to be your 3-parter. That's your top grade, peer, and core values interviews. But for me, I like to do a wrap up. And I would say that when you think about a secret weapon, setting up it's a 15-minute is what it's scheduled for. It's usually like 5 minutes, but it's my like HR check-in. And our coordinator already schedules it for me. And it's a way to jump in with the candidate. How are you feeling? How did it go today? How are you feeling about this opportunity? And just reconfirming those HR details before we even get close to an offer, right? I don't have the feedback from the team yet, but I already have had that check-in to make sure the candidate's still feeling really engaged, still excited about the opportunity, and really gauge their feelings. And then if there are any questions that they're having, I can address those on the spot as well.
Love it. One thing that you said at the very beginning of that was you are scheduling a candidate on the hiring manager's calendar when you have them on the phone. And I think there's a couple things that are really actually super valuable about that. One is obviously it's just super fast, right? Like they're just locked in. Any good salesperson knows that. But 2, it means that like you're projecting to the candidate that you've got the utmost trust of your hiring manager. Like, I don't need to run it by them. I don't need to check with them. I don't need to like have them like take a look at your profile. It's like, nope, I know exactly what we're looking for in this role. You're the right fit. Let's go. Like, I love that.
Absolutely. And it takes time to build that trust, right? We have a new recruiter on our team and I've been sharing with her like tactics on how to get there, right? But it takes time to build that trust. It's not something I recommend doing, month one in your new role, or even, it takes some time. But I would say, as you continue to do that and build that trust with the hiring manager, it's a really great tactic.
Yeah. On that point, Manisha, what are the most important things that you do with your hiring managers to build trust so that you can move really fast together?
Yeah, I think kind of what I mentioned earlier, it is about setting expectations, just like what are you expecting? What are they expecting? Hey, and educating them, like what's worked in the past with other hiring managers. I think that sometimes it doesn't always work right. It's not a perfect formula with every hiring manager. So there are times where you may have to lose 1 to 2 candidates, right, in order for them to kind of learn that lesson. And going back to like, hey, this is something that's worked with another hiring manager, and kind of getting them on board. I don't think it's intentional, right, from the hiring manager. It's 100% of our job and a portion of theirs. So they're not thinking about all the small details of all the follow-ups and like the candidate experience and the things that we're doing day to day.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. You kind of alluded to this, but one of the other questions that came from one of the folks at home, Julie from Lockmuller Group, was what's the best tip for getting hiring managers to realize that this is a tight market and they can't like wait until next week to make a decision and present an offer? It sounds like, Manisha, one of the tactics is let them lose a great candidate. Like that'll sting and they won't forget. Rachel, is there anything else that you've done to drive a hiring manager to be like, no, you got to make a call on this candidate like today?
Yeah, I like to just pull reports. Greenhouse has a lot of really great reports. We also have started using Talent Wall and just showing them the analytics of how many calls that I've done, how many candidates have made it to that presentation stage and each stage through the process, so that even if they've only met with 3 candidates, they see that I've taken 20 phone screens, right? And that we have narrowed down the funnel, and just educating them with the data of ultimately like we have to make a decision. Like, we've seen this many candidates and I can promise you like this is the top candidate. Yeah. And I think just trying to really lean in on is this something that's coachable if they have objections, right? Or is this something that is like a must have for this role? And really trying to understand what are their concerns with not making that hire. And as Misha alluded to earlier, like having that quick check-in right after a final interview really helps us to move quickly as well.
Makes sense. All right, I'm going to pull back a little bit. We talked a lot about hiring manager partnership and kind of how that can drive speed or the flip side if not really tight. But I'm curious in both of your perspectives on just like what is the biggest obstacle standing in the way of moving candidates through the process faster? Rachel, you can start with you. Like what is the hurdle that you run into, the thing that you wish like you could just rip out so that you could actually move faster?
Yeah, scheduling. I mean, time, right? Like our hiring managers are being pulled 100 different directions and our candidates are interviewing with a lot of companies, right? And so trying to find that perfect alignment. We've started using calendar blocking some with our more tactical, busy hiring managers who are maybe traveling now as the world is kind of reopening, or, have families and just as life is getting in the way a little bit, having blocks on their calendar for interviews, right? That are pre-blocked week over week, where I know I have this 2-hour block that I can schedule, a candidate into. And we found a lot of success to help us continue to move really quickly by having those interview blocks built in.
Do you have hiring managers who will say, yeah, you can just schedule over stuff on my calendar because this is the top priority?
For sure. Absolutely. And I have hiring managers who are like, I'm not moving a one-on-one. My people are most important. Right. So I think you see both sides of the coin there. And you balance it. And that's where the interview blocking can be really helpful when a hiring manager is being pulled a lot of different directions. And I think the more senior level that you get up there, right, the more important it is to have those conversations of like, if we wait a week, we will lose this candidate. Like, can you meet before work or after work or on your lunch, right? Like where is the flexibility?
Your people are your most important thing, but this could be your person. Like, come on. Yep. What about you? What gets in the way of moving super fast?
Yeah, from a recruiting perspective, if I had to pick one thing that's like a challenge, it's making sure, or when everyone in the interview process is not on the same page. So, for example, there's a lot of like moving parts when it comes to like filling an opening. First, it's having that alignment with the hiring manager and them selecting the interviews who are going to be participating. in the process, and making sure everybody knows their part. Like, hey, here's the questions you're going to ask, the focus areas, and just knowing all of that before you even start recruiting on the role. Are these interviewers on board with actually participating in the process? I've just seen instances where an interviewer will decline a candidate interview because there hasn't really been communication from the hiring manager, and it can hold up the process. So it ultimately, a lot of it is on the talent partner to like project manage and drive the process.
How do you get people to invest the time up front to do that work when they're moving at a million miles an hour?
In terms of wanting interviewers wanting to participate?
Getting like, here's the plan, here's who's going to ask what, like, here's who's involved, these are the steps. Like, how do you make sure that work gets done so that you don't have to figure it out along the way, or so that the communication doesn't fall through the cracks when you're ready to go?
I think it starts from when you have like the intake, or if you want to call the kickoff meeting with the hiring manager, and just emphasizing the importance of like, hey, this is why we need to have all the interviewers selected, and making sure that you're communicating with them that they're going to be participating. Are they on board? Because if we don't have that like fleshed out, here's what will happen, and then it'll be a bad candidate experience.
Do you find, Rachel, that you take a similar approach? Like, we got to map this whole thing out first, know exactly who's going to play what role, and be tight on that?
I do. I also will ask for multiple interviewers. So like if it's a peer interview and they give me 2 people, I'm like, okay, I need 4, right? So that way, if one of the 2 are not available, we have some backups already built into the process. And then the Slack channels are also super helpful in just keeping everybody aligned. But I think for us, it's just, being transparent up front. And then I also will always share the job description with my interviewers, so that way they know what we're looking for in the candidate, because I found misalignment there as well before.
Yeah, I was going to say, when you have, I love the idea of creating Slack in the system where it's like, I got 2 people, but if they're both, in a sales call, I got somebody else I can go to. The flip side is, how do you drive consistency in calibration and kind of what people are looking for when you have 4 potential people who could all jump into this interview and you don't know who's going to be until 24 hours, before it gets scheduled?
Yeah. So for us, it's just it's just that alignment in the beginning, right? So it's knowing that all 4 of them are considered peer interviews or core values, right? And they know their role, and we've had that training prior. We do interview training here. And so that's super helpful in just keeping everybody aligned of like, what are you looking for as a peer, right? What are you looking for in core values? What is the outcome of this presentation supposed to be? And I find that the focus attributes and the scorecards are really helpful in having those questions already built out, so people have a clear alignment of what they're looking for at the end of the day.
Makes sense. Manisha, you grew up in staffing. What did you learn in staffing that's translated to now being in-house that's helped you move really fast?
Yeah, so one thing that I learned, especially from one of the leaders that I worked with in staffing, is he would always say time kills all deals. And it's something I 100% agree with, especially with just how competitive the market has become for engineering talent. Some things that I have like brought over, just being urgent, setting expectations. So I found that when working with candidates or even hiring managers, it's just making sure you're being urgent in your response time. I think that's what builds the trust. And in return, I was able to get my candidates scheduled quickly and feedback from hiring managers much quicker than my competitors. And then I think the other part is providing a good candidate experience. Like, we were trained to be consistent in our follow-ups throughout the candidate's journey during the interview process. So it's not only about speed, but giving them that like white glove service and rolling out like the red carpet. So things that like Rachel mentioned, right? It's just like following up with them before their interview, like wish them good luck, follow up, see how it went, and just get a feel for what they're looking for.
Makes total sense. Is there anything that you feel like you do differently than other recruiters in the conversation itself because of your experience on the staffing side?
Maybe it's just like more of my style, but definitely trying to get to know them even like on a personal level, versus just like asking a set of like questions, right? I think that's sort of what stands out, especially with how candidates are being more particular, right? It's not just about like the product or the software that the company is like building, but am I going to have a good experience with the talent partner that I'm working with?
Makes sense. Rachel, what about you? What do you do in the conversation that you feel works really, really well? I mean, you talked about asking 3 specific questions. Is there anything else that like you make sure happens in that first discussion that allows you to move fast?
Yeah, I think making it personal. At the end of the day, like just being transparent. I've been living at my parents' house for a couple of weeks as I'm buying my first house, right? And I think just being honest about where you are, right? And like being vulnerable. Like obviously I'm not oversharing anything that's super personal, but sharing those kind of details, I think just makes people feel more comfortable with you as a recruiter, and they're more transparent and honest with you at the same time. And so, I like to start my conversations with just like, how's your day going? Right? Like, how are you as a person today? Not just like, great, why do you want to work at Salesloft? I think those pieces, just keeping it personal and being honest goes by far in just building that relationship.
What percentage of your candidates are you on text message basis with?
I'd probably say 50%. It'd probably be more when I was recruiting in our London team. We were using WhatsApp a ton. I was recruiting in London, and WhatsApp was a really helpful tool being a US-based recruiter. But I would say at least 50%. I'm texting, talking with them, having conversations, making sure they're good. And I think it just, as candidates feel more comfortable, they text you more too. But I encourage candidates to text me. It's something that on the first call, I'm like, you can text me, you can call me, you can email me. Like, I am available. I'm here as your resource, right? And just being honest with them about that.
Manisha, what about you? What percentage of your, I'm curious because like your go-to-market tech may be different, but yeah, like are you texting with your candidates?
Yeah, I would say probably like 90%. That's kind of what I relied on when I was in staffing, right? Is like, it's all about speed, right? Beating your competitor. And so bringing that over here, I tend to see that you get a quicker response rate. I'm more likely to check my like text messages because my phone's sitting right here versus like email. And I think the same thing with candidates, right? Because they're getting blown up via email all the time. And so I've just been able to get in touch with them a lot faster.
Cool. So we talked about calendar blocks and texting a little bit, but let's talk a little bit more about like tools, platforms. Rachel, what are the go-to tools that you feel help you spend your time more efficiently, run faster, like take more time and spend it on like meaningful tasks that deliver great candidate experience and move them through the process quickly?
Yeah. Calendly is a big one. I use I have a couple different calendar invites that I can send. I like to do 20-minute phone interviews. And so I send 20-minute calendar invites to candidates. And if it's a candidate I know we're not going to move forward with, I have 10 extra minutes to get done what I need to get done. And if it's a candidate and the conversation's really going well, no one schedules a 10-minute meeting on my calendar. So that's been a secret to success of moving quickly. Right. I won't tell candidates that, obviously, but I definitely have found a lot of success in the 20-minute meeting. I also have a check-in meeting that I use if I can't get a candidate on the phone or they're not responding to a text. I'll send them an email to do like a check-in. And I also use that for my feedback calls. So I will do feedback calls with candidates, if we're not moving forward for one reason or another, kind of post that rejection call, right? Like giving them that feedback of what happened, why we decided not to move forward, and then letting them give us feedback as well. I want to continue to improve, my team does, our hiring managers. And so just making sure it's a two-way feedback call there.
Manisha, what about you? What are the tools that you lean on to move as fast and efficiently as possible?
Yeah, so I'm definitely going to kind of bounce off of what Rachel mentioned. Use Calendly pretty religiously. It's been a game changer in terms of just not having to go back and forth with the candidate. And I like the option of having reminders via Calendly that they have a call scheduled with you at whatever time. And I think it's been helpful to just be able to have the candidate actually show up for the interview, because I was seeing quite a bit of like no-shows. So when I put that option on, I feel like that kind of went down.
Nice. We talked at the beginning of the conversation around candidates coming in with competing offers. And Rachel, you talked about like not wanting to just use comp as a leverage, a point of leverage to get folks over the line. let's get like super tactical. When somebody says that they've got a competing offer, how do you respond to it? Like, what do you actually say to them?
I can go first here. I always say I'm going to take my recruiter hat off and I'd love to just talk to you, right? And just kind of taking that hat off saying, let's have a conversation. Like, what are you using to make this decision? Have you thought about, what is you're most excited about in your next opportunity? And then drawing back to, I know during our first call, you said you were interested in XYZ, right? Are those the things that are still most important to you? And do you feel like this opportunity has all of that? Or are there things that are missing there? Right? Or selling to what Salesloft has, right? Like, we have phenomenal benefits. Is there something in that benefit package, right? Knowing what their motivators are that I can talk to a little bit more that will help them to make a more informed decision.
Manisha, what about you? What's like your go-to response to like, so I've got a competing offer?
Yeah, I think the first thing that I bring up is let's set compensation aside and let's talk about like what do you like about that company? Are there any concerns or hesitations? And then same thing about MURAL. Because I think when you take compensation out of the picture, it really makes them think about like what's actually important. Like, obviously, you got to pay the bills, right? But that I don't think that's like everything when a candidate's making a decision. And I think that tactic works pretty well because it actually gets them to think about what's most important.
Yeah. Rachel, you talked about, and both of you, but Rachel, you were explicitly like, I've recruited for like all of the roles across go-to-market. When you start on a new role, right, think about like, how do you move as fast as possible to get up to speed, to ramp, to know what to look for? What has worked for you really well learning a new role that you're recruiting for?
Yeah. So the kickoff, I have questions I'll ask that, what does the ideal candidate look like? How is success measured? What are the growth opportunities? What does the day-to-day of this role look like during the kickoff call? If it's a role that I'm like very much out of my scope, I sometimes will sit down and shadow someone who's currently in the role, and just spend 30 minutes with them, just chatting with them, asking them questions, asking, how do you do this? Why do you do that? What is this? And so really just trying to get a good grasp on it so that I can talk effectively about it to a candidate. And then asking the hiring manager for selling points, right? Like, why would someone want to come work for you and your team, right? Like, what is super exciting about this opportunity? And that always is really helpful too. But I would say for me, it's the kickoff and then sitting down with someone in the role currently, if there is somebody.
Makes sense. Manisha, what about you?
Yeah, so I definitely think all the points that Rachel mentioned are pretty similar to the process that I go through. One thing that I've seen really helpful on the engineering side is actually talking to the product manager who's aligned to that team, because they're the most in the know of what actual work that they're doing. And I think that's been really helpful in just like selling the opportunity to the candidate.
Makes a ton of sense. Have either of you seen recruiters on your team either reviewing your interviews or like others as they get up to running on new roles?
Yeah, we have 2 new recruiters on our team, and we've been sharing a lot of our Bright Hire interviews with them, just so that they can review our talk tracks and review what's worked in the past and what hasn't. And then sharing data with them too of like what you should expect, right? Like, should you expect 10 phone screens or 20 phone screens for this new role that you're going to be working on, and looking at the historical data. But definitely have found like sharing and having them shadow different calls has been super helpful in ramping our new recruiters.
Makes a ton of sense. Manisha, have you like had any experience like looking at hiring manager screens or seeing what they're asking in their interviews to learn more about like how they're pitching the role or what questions they're asking or what's driving decisions?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of information that sometimes isn't shared right during like your intake or kickoff, that sometimes hiring managers don't realize is important for you to know. And so it's great to be able to, on your own time, go and review like key points when they've interviewed candidates, because I've gotten a lot of insight and being able to have better conversations, right, with candidates, especially when you're working on leadership level roles. There's a lot of like strategy and tactical things that they're looking for.
Makes a ton of sense. Yeah. Have you ever like gone back to a set of interviews when a hiring manager said like no to a candidate to figure out like what happened, why, like fill in the details on the 2 on the scorecard? Rachel, you were laughing about this. What's your experience?
We had an SDR candidate yesterday who got like all great feedback, and our director had met with this candidate and had not submitted a scorecard, and yes, was pushing back saying, no, I don't think we should hire this person. Here's why. And we were able to send both interviews to like the opposite party, the director and the hiring manager, for them to review each other's to then kind of come to a common decision. That decision has not been made yet, but hopefully it's positive. But it's definitely been helpful in just sharing different interviews so that they can make more aligned decisions as well.
Yeah, it's one thing that we've seen a lot is like, you think about all the steps in the process. You talked about scheduling being like a huge blocker in terms of moving fast. But certainly a huge blocker moving fast is indecision, right? Or saying no to a candidate you should have said yes to, because you could be done with that search like yesterday if you got that person over the line. I'm curious if either of you have seen instances where you were able to say yes to candidates that might have otherwise been rejected, or move them through the process faster as a result of being able to share conversations and review and kind of get on the same page.
I think, so I did want to share something real quick. I know that you were asking like if a manager has said no to a candidate. I've had kind of the opposite situation where I've said no to a candidate. So basically I had a new hiring manager join the company, and they reached out to me because they saw a candidate in Greenhouse who had been referred by another hiring manager in their network. Mm-hmm. And they noticed that I had screened the candidate and was curious like why they weren't scheduled on their calendar for next steps. So that was kind of like a aha moment for me using BrightHire, because instead of just saying, hey, I didn't think this candidate was a good fit, I actually shared the recording, and they were able to see specific parts of the interview. So tying it back to like data points instead of trying to remember exactly why the candidate wasn't a fit. So I thought it was really helpful to save time because the hiring manager is super busy, right? And that way they're not having to spend 60 minutes talking to that candidate.
Yeah. How much time was your hiring manager actually spending like reviewing highlights from your conversation, do you think?
I would say probably 5-10 minutes, right? If you're able to just check out the key questions and review their answers versus spending 60 minutes.
Makes sense. Yeah, Rachel, you mentioned like you've got like a one-on-one every week with your hiring manager. Like, are you bringing BrightHire into that at all?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting. I have a commercial AE role, and I have 6 hiring managers and 1 VP, right? And we hire people for all 6 teams at different points. And so you have 6 stakeholders that you're trying to, and the candidate's meeting 3 or 4 of them throughout the process, but they're not going to meet all 6. And so for us, being able to share interviews and share clips has been by far beneficial in helping to make clear hiring decisions quickly, instead of having to schedule additional meetings with somebody because they didn't get to do XYZ interview, that they want to view this part or that part. And so that's been super helpful for us, and just being able to share those amongst the many stakeholders within one job. But yeah, I mean, during the weekly meetings, absolutely bringing in BrightHire to help, when there's objections or there's questions, or, we want to look at this part of a candidate or that part, being able to just quickly search during that meeting, bring a point up and share a clip, has definitely helped us, make more decision, whether that's yes or no, but move past that no decision, indecision point.
Makes a ton of sense. It sounds like sometimes the best solve for scheduling is not having to schedule at all.
Absolutely.
You talked, Rachel, I want to stay with you because you talked earlier in our conversation about how one of the most important things that you did, and actually both of you mentioned this, was building personal rapport with candidates, being vulnerable, like, sharing, hey, I'm, in the middle of trying to buy a new house. Those personal conversations, did you have any concerns when you started to use BrightHire at the outset that you weren't going to be able to have those conversations, or that it was going to get in the way, or like, what was your early experience using the product?
Yeah. So we recorded interviews with Salesloft. Salesloft has a recording function prior to using BrightHire. So I think we were in a different boat. I also have a great relationship with my manager and our hiring teams. And I would never share something with a candidate I wouldn't share with my hiring manager or my manager first. And I think they appreciate that I'm honest and transparent with candidates about whatever's going on in my life. And I think it shows a little bit of the Salesloft culture as well. We practice vulnerability trust here. And I think being able to show that in an interview process just shows a little bit of our culture more than like telling you I'm showing you, right? And that piece And I think it's one of the ways that we've won candidates and helped bring people over when we're talking about, what's important to you in your next role. Can you have flexibility, right? If I've done XYZ in the morning that is not part of my work, being able to be transparent about that with a candidate.
Yeah. Manisha, were you already recording interviews before you started to formally use BrightHire, or was that a change for you?
Yeah, it was definitely a change for me. And I think this is like a thought that most talent partners probably had when they're first introduced to BrightHire is like, hey, I'm feeling a little like self-conscious that all my interviews are going to be recorded. But I would say after using BrightHire 1 to 2 weeks, it kind of became like second nature to my interview process. And I've been using BrightHire as a self-coaching tool. So it's like, am I talking too much, not talking enough? Am I asking the right questions? Am I being engaging and smiling enough? So I feel like it's been really helpful.
That's awesome. Yeah. Have you seen like peer coaching or sharing across your teams at all as a result of the visibility? Rachel, it seems like.
Yeah, I love to share mine with my manager, right? And get like coaching and feedback that way. I found that to be super helpful as just like a coaching aspect as I want to get better as a recruiter, right? Like in my day to day. I also really love the analytics. I'm a data nerd in a lot of ways. And so being able to go in, I'm the fastest talker on my team, fun fact. So, being able to share those different pieces and just see the analytics has been really cool. And that's been one of my favorite things about the product too.
Yeah. If you were to narrow it down to like the one way where being able to share or review an interview has been most helpful for you in terms of moving fast through the process, what's it been?
I think when I think about moving fast, it's being able to share interviews, right? Like sharing those recordings very easily, having our hiring managers be able to review them and make more decision. I think ultimately has been the piece that's been the most effective for us in moving quickly with so many stakeholders.
And Manisha, what about you? How has BrightHire helped your teams move faster?
Yeah, so this might be a little bit different from like what Rachel mentioned, but I also think this is helpful when we have like a new talent partner coming onto the team. Instead of having them, live shadow your interviews and you spending time trying to coordinate those on their calendar, it's great to be able to have them just review videos from different talent partners so they can figure out what their style is, but at least figure out how to run the interview. So I think that it's a faster way to ramp them up. And one of the things that one of our new talent partners mentioned is basically she would review the video and make her own evaluation of whether she would move forward with this candidate or not, and then refer back to the scorecards and see if she was like on the right track. So that I thought that was pretty cool.
That's awesome. That sounds like a great way to formalize your calibration and like your spidey sense on candidates early on. This is a crazy market. Not everybody is being successful. It's hard, right? Like you have candidates who ghost and people who take the promotion as opposed to your offer. Obviously, we brought both of you on board to this conversation because you've both been super successful in navigating these waters. If you were to give a piece of advice to somebody who is struggling in this market right now, what advice would you give to them? Rachel, we'll start with you.
I would say keep it personal. I think building the personal relationships, whether it's with your hiring managers and your candidates is where I have found the most success over the last year plus during this crazy market is just continuing to overly communicate. And I think when you have that personal relationship, it just comes more naturally to overly communicate. But those pieces I would say are most important for where how I've had success.
Manisha, what about you?
Yeah, I think that when people are your product, there are always things that are out of your control, right? And that's okay. I think it's having the mindset of let's focus on the things that you can control. So going back to the basics of recruiting. So figure out what's working, what's not working, what could you do for the next time to prevent those pitfalls. Just take time at the end of the day or at the end of the week and just reflect on not only what you were successful at, but what were some of the failures, and just sort of put a plan together for the following week to improve.
Week by week, like a little bit better every week. I love that. To the folks who are on right now, I'm going to turn to a couple questions from some individuals who submitted them beforehand. But if you have a question for Rachel or Manisha, either throw it in the chat or in the ask a question and we can jump into it. But I'm going to start with a question from Taylor at Alpha Sites. We talked a lot about moving really fast. How are each of your teams actually tracking time to hire or time to fill? Like, how are you defining it? What metric do you actually measure? And are you personally evaluated against that metric, or how does that metric kind of factor into like your specific personal work? Manisha, we can start with you and then go back to Rachel.
Yeah, so we use Salesloft. I think it's useful to like track that time to hire and time to fill. So it pulls data from like our ATS for each opening department, and then even talent partner. So we're using that data to like look at things like what's causing this hiring manager to not fill their role, or even like the recruiter side, right? So we're not necessarily evaluated or held to a metric for like time to fill. It's more like just streaming a process, right? So visually being able to see like your pipeline and what can we do to help move candidates through the process. I feel like every fill has a story behind it. So really just tracking it to be able to hire more efficiently and quickly.
Have you, just to pull a thread on that one, you mentioned looking for specific hiring managers or specific roles that are taking longer than you would otherwise expect. How have you diagnosed what's going on, what's happening, what the issue is when you find, oh, hey, this seems off here, we need to address that problem?
Yeah, I think it's about having a conversation with the hiring manager, right? And I guess, for example, if it's, hey, we want to hire a diverse candidate, the probability of you finding that person within 30 to 60 days is probably going to be a lot lower, right? So sort of dissecting what their requirements are, where do they have flexibility, and being able to adjust from that.
Makes sense. Rachel, what about you? How is Salesloft measuring your time to hire or time to fill? How are you defining it? And how does it factor into kind of your performance?
Yeah, so we look at Talent Wall as well as the system that we use, super helpful. We are looking at from the opening date of the rec, right? If it's an evergreen rec, we're looking at the open date within Greenhouse, and then tracking that to when the candidate is hired. We measure that we share that with our board. And so we look at 45 days or less and are pacing towards that for each candidate. It doesn't always happen, right? But we're looking at an average for our entire team. I definitely track it as an individual. I'm also a super competitive person. So I keep a personal track there to make sure that I'm sticking to that, and kind of, as I think about my bigger team, right? If my time is a little bit lower, then I am helping the team overall to reach that 45 days.
Got it. In order to hit those kinds of goals, have either of you actually worked with hiring managers to restructure the interview process, like remove a step altogether?
Yeah, we actually were able to look at BrightHire two of our interviews for our commercial AE role and remove an interview completely. So we went from 2 30-minute interviews to a 45-minute interview. And we're able to say, like, we can cover these questions that we're doing in this first interview with in the second, and make it and saved our hiring manager's time, but also saved a step in our process. And being able to go back and review those interviews prior to that decision was super helpful.
Got it. So you're saving 15 minutes in actual interviewer time, but you're also saving the scheduling and the coordination and the follow-up and the days in between all of that.
Yep.
By combining those two into one.
Yeah.
Manisha, have you seen anything like that on the technical side?
Yeah. So one thing that I've found helpful, because I had some challenges here at the beginning, is to go ahead and schedule the entire process for the candidate. Because what ends up happening is you'll have them interview. Now you've got your coordinator reaching out to schedule, and sometimes the candidate doesn't respond immediately. So another week goes by. And if you're doing that for every step of the process, you may end up looking back and it's taken a month to fill the role. And there's a chance that they may have either gotten another offer or changed their mind and decided to stay there. So that's actually been really helpful.
Got it. Last one. At the end of the process, you're getting ready to close a candidate. What specifically are you doing with everybody else on the team to prepare for that closing conversation? Are you like reviewing what happened in their conversations? Are you prepping somebody else to deliver a closing? Like, how are you sharing information, getting ready to actually get a candidate like excited in that final conversation to get them over the line? Rachel, we'll start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So for us, it's that Slack channel. We're confirming that we're moving forward with the candidate. I typically will just screenshot the scorecards and say, everything looks great. Are we good to move forward? From there, it's going through approvals. And then I'm pre-closing candidates. So as it's going through approvals, I'm calling the candidate and I'm saying, everything's looking positive. Are you feeling 100% about this offer? Are you feeling, if we gave you an offer today, are you 100% excited? How are you feeling? Where's your head at? And making sure that we've pre-closed them so that way when we actually are delivering the verbal offer, there is no surprise, right, to the candidate or to our hiring team of where their head is at, right? And then as it's going to approvals, I'm communicating back with the hiring manager, like pre-closed 100% or pre-closed. They have these questions, these objections, whatever's going on there. And so that pre-close conversation is super helpful. We will do roundups, if there is more questionable feedback, right? It's not all positive. So we'll get together and typically I'll schedule those, if we're looking at 3 candidates for a final round for, one role. We'll schedule after everybody's finished, we'll schedule a quick 15-minute meeting. We'll pull in BrightHire sometimes. We'll pull in, just where our kind of going back to that kickoff doc, right, of what we were looking for, and pulling in our key decision makers there to make sure that we're making a decision quickly.
Got it. Manisha, what does your candidate closing war room look like?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty similar process. Pretty immediately after the candidates complete the process, I'll reach out to the team and the hiring manager to get feedback. It's not a perfect situation every single time. We obviously try to pre-close them as much as possible, but I think the reality is there's definitely times where the candidate's not ready to accept. So that's where I'll partner with the hiring manager and let them know, hey, here's the concerns. Would you mind doing a wrap-up call to kind of sell them on this opportunity? And I've found that really helpful.
Awesome. Rachel, Manisha, thank you so much for spending time with us to drop a bunch of knowledge on how to move really fast through the interview process or the hiring process, closing candidates, sharing a bunch about the tools you use, the tips, the tricks. I love the 3 questions in the screening call, blocking time on calendars, setting expectations with hiring managers, getting them on board, all really, really awesome stuff. And really excited that you're seeing a lot of success with BrightHire as well. Thank you so much for spending the time with us today.
Thank you. This has been great.
All right, y'all. Thanks for joining. This will be posted online. We'll have clips. It'll be fun. We'll send a recap. You can go to brighthire.ai to check out the recap, the blog post, the highlights, and we'll see you on the next one. Rachel, Manisha, thanks again.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Al.